So yeah, I'm going to talk about the larger birds, and I'm also going to briefly touch about some of the smaller flocking birds, such as your redwings and starlings and stuff like that. But my name is Jeff Pelc with the United States Department of Agriculture. I'm with Wildlife Services, and our mission is to deal with any human-wildlife conflict. So we deal a lot with, the ag community, public safety such as airports, and also with a lot of wildlife diseases. Here are some of the common smaller nuisance birds that we're kind of used to seeing around the farm or agricultural settings. Our pigeons, our rock doves, the slew of blackbird species, European starling, and the European house sparrow. Now, most of these are actually invasive and non-native. The pigeons, sparrows, and European starlings, hence the name, are non-native and invasive. They were brought here either purposefully or accidentals, and have just dispersed and spread there from the beginning of time. Here are some of the other bird species, like we said, the Canada geese and the wild turkey, very prevalent in some areas of the state. More so, with the turkeys in the southeastern part of Ohio, where it's heavily forested, but we're also seeing them up in the northwestern part of the state. And the Canada geese, specifically resident Canada geese, they're year-round residents. Some of the types of damages that are associated with these birds: crop damage, livestock, any dairy farmers around here, with the starlings specifically in the wintertime, consuming a lot of that feed. There's actually been studies done where these starlings, European starlings, will pick out the high protein feed, and milk production actually has gone down because there's so many birds consuming this feed and the cattle actually can't get to it. Structures: everybody has European starlings and sparrows in their barns. The nesting, the defecation causes, rapid degradation and corrosion to a lot of farm equipment and the actual structures themselves. Pigeons, they tend to roost in the same building every night, so you just get that buildup of fecal material and guano. And then also there's human health and safety risks to flocking birds and nuisance birds across the state. And damaged landscapes, and also just a general nuisance. These Canada geese, the droppings I'm sure everybody's seen in city parks and some golf courses, just spread out over sidewalks. People have slipped and fell, and broke wrists and ankles and stuff like that because there's so much. It's almost like ice on these sidewalks and slick areas. So what do we do here? The general theme is, we'll just go out and, do some lethal removal and call it a day. That's probably what goes on a lot. But you got to really sit down and assess the damage. You got to be, know what you're dealing with, because some of these birds are protected by federal Migratory Bird Treaty Acts and other federal regulations and state regulations. And then you got to say to yourself, is it worth me doing management for these birds versus the cost or damage that I'm having? If you're at that kind of medium ground and you can live with it, then you may not want to implement a management plan. But if it's costing you your livelihood, you better do something. And when you do something, plan to continually do that something, just like changing the oil in your trucks. You're going to have to do that all the time because that problem will eventually come back. You just can't do it once and forget about it. So here's what we call integrated wildlife damage management. And what it is basically using every tool in the toolbox that you could possibly use. There's really no one silver bullet to this solution. And there's several key elements here. One is population management. Exclusion is, keeping the birds out from where they're going or where they want to go. Pesticides, repellents, harassment, habitat modification, and education. The bottom one, education, in my opinion, is most important, because if you don't know about the birds, their biology, ecology, and the rules behind them, you're really 2 steps backwards and not going to have the full effect that you want to do. There's going to be a lot of hair pulling and head scratching. So you want to know the law. Like I said, any migratory bird, that's native to America, songbirds, Canada geese, raptors, owls, hawks, they are protected under this Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And if you look closely, it says no person shall take, possess, barter, offer, sale, purchase any migratory bird, part, nest, eggs, or such thereof without a federal depredation permit. So you have to have something in hand before you do any type of lethal actions on some of these birds. Our agency helps facilitate that, because sometimes when we're talking about Canada geese, you'd get a permit through the state March through August, basically. And then thereafter, you can also get a permit to do some lethal control for Canada geese outside of those seasons. Some people don't have time to deal with their problems, so there's nuisance wildlife control operators, and in Ohio you have to be certified and licensed to do that if you're doing it for a fee. So the Division of Wildlife has a great website on nuisance species animals, and then also if they have lists per county of the licensed nuisance wildlife control operators per county if you want to go that route instead of trying to do it yourself. So again, just going into these birds here. Before we start a management plan, we got to know really what's their protection. So pigeons, they're not protected. They're non-native. These blackbirds, they are. However, there's a kind of disclaimer I'll tell you about there at the end. European sparrows, there's multitude of sparrows out there, sparrow species. So you better make sure you're dealing with the European house sparrows and not a song sparrow or a chipping sparrow, because when you get into those birds, again, they're federally protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Thus, if you'd kill one without a permit, you'd be in violation of that. And then the European starling. So who can tell me what entity governs the wild turkey in Ohio? ODNR, yep, Division of Wildlife. That's a state game bird. The Canada geese, they're federally protected migratory birds. So essentially the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are the regulatory authority over the Canada geese. And when it comes to resident Canada geese, the time frame from I think March 10th through August 1st, it's through August, they give that authority to the Division of Wildlife, and they issue depredation permits for Canada geese because that's the resident geese population that they're trying to address. So knowing the birds, you got to know their habitat, biology, and behaviors. Do they eat insects, grains, other, if they're raptors, are they predatory? And where are they nesting? You don't know what you're doing or what they're doing. And then their flocking behavior. Like I said, this European starlings this time of year, they're breaking up now, but, fall flocks of starlings and blackbirds get into the thousands, tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands. And if you have those flocks kind of setting up specifically on corn, you get a lot of corn damage throughout the year. And then, again, the cattle and dairy operations, when the really dead of winter hits and you have snowfall on the ground, those birds have nowhere to go because all the grain and stubble in the fields is gone. Their food source is cattle and dairy operations. So that picture in the top right corner there, can anybody tell me what that is? It's about 4 feet high. I mean, you can see the rafters and the structures. That's actually a starling nest. They will just continually bring in material as long as they can. And this one is in a loft or an attic of a building or hangar. Whereas your Canada geese, this is the time of year they're pairing up and getting pretty aggressive. I actually saw one trying to construct a nest here 2 weeks ago already. So they're going to start that egg laying process. And this is when they get real aggressive. So this is the time of year that if you have goose and perceived or not perceived, but potential goose problems down the road, if you're used to that, you want to start harassing these birds off because they are going to set up shop and it's going to be much harder to discourage them from utilizing the area that you're trying to protect. Again, knowing the birds. What I wanted to illustrate with these next couple of pictures here is identifying crop damage. I'm not going to give you a lesson on crop damage. There's a lot of good publications out there. Purdue University has a great one. Ohio State University Extension has one as well. And there's a lot of good resources out there on how to identify crop damage. Because although you might see that bird or animal in the field, a lot of times what happens is people are like, oh, that's what's causing the damage. They really have to sit down and look and inspect that crop and when and what time of year you're having it to determine what the real cause is. So this one here, it's kind of a faded out picture, but can anybody tell me what might have caused that damage? Geese, yep. So here again, the geese like that young new sprouts, and they damage it early, and then if it does live through that process, you'll see that continue throughout the stage of life of plant growth there. What about this? Pretty big swath of, used to be probably like knee-high corn maybe.
Turkeys?
Nope, hail.
Oh.
What about that? Yep. Blackbirds. So blackbirds tend to peel that all back and take those kernels out. Raccoons, you'll see a lot of times they'll knock the stalk down, and they're really ripping at it, and you'll see mud and claws and tooth prints. So again, assess the damage. What about this? That's a close-up of a young corn stalk about 6 inches tall. Deer. Very good. Very good. Last but not least.
Beaver.
Who said beaver? Absolutely right. Yep. Beavers will do that. They take those mature stalks and they'll pull them down in the creeks and they'll make dens and dams with them. And we've seen just big areas of beaver damage coming from that.
We had it last fall.
Did you?
Do they eat the corn too?
They will, yeah. You know, if it's at a certain stage, that I've seen that, but usually they use it as, you know, yep. So specifically, I want to talk about turkeys because a lot of people blame turkeys for crop damage. And if you know anything about turkeys, they do eat plant material, they do eat seeds, and they do eat insects. And a lot of people were like, well, we saw turkeys, they must be causing the damage. But in reality, a lot of the studies that have been done is that is not the case. They're in these fields, specifically soybean fields. July, they've been seen a lot in July, and that's also in coincidentally concurrence with a Japanese beetle hatch. So those birds are actually picking beetles off the plants, not damaging the crop out there. So yes, they can cause damage. I'm not trying to alleviate that. But again, it's going off to that, you know, perceived, I saw the animal in my field, it must be causing the damage, when in reality it's probably deer or raccoons at night and you're not seeing the culprits.
Are they the ones that's going after the seed after planting?
The turkeys?
Yes.
Sometimes sometimes yes. And again, you got to really identify those tracks. Everybody might have, you know, around here knows about trail cameras. Those are a great tool to really find the culprits of what's going on. We've used them in the past to determine just that. Again, so how do we solve the problems? Integrated wildlife damage management. What I'm trying to, you know, persuade here is you've got to use everything you can in the toolbox. There is no silver bullet. Yeah. Education is key. So here's the type of things I want to talk about, kind of each element or each tool. A lot of them may or may not be applicable in your situation. The first one here are repellents. There's different types of repellents out there. Typically, I don't recommend repellents because they're just a lot of work. They're sticky, they're nasty, and quite honestly, I haven't seen a lot of benefit from them. Now, they will work on smaller areas, like if you had a ledge, just like you see here, this chair rail, where pigeons are kind of hanging out all the time. One of these tactile repellents might work because those birds don't like to feel that stickiness. However, I will warn you, when it becomes July, that stuff gets a little bit softer and then it kind of drip off, and then so whatever's below it gets, you know, kind of all gooey and whatnot. There's also a behavioral one. This is the anthraquinone for geese. It's also called flight stopper, I believe. So what it is you would spray your grass or your crops or whatever you want to protect with this flight stopper. What it does is it causes an irritation to the back of the bird's throat. But it also has a UV spectrum to it, so the birds can see UV light. So what they do is next time they come, they say, whoop, there's that purple grass. We're going to stand back because we know what it did last time to us. So golf courses and places like that utilize them. Some of the smaller vineyards will use some of these products like that. But Ohio isn't a constant weather, just like we see today. So the rain over time will wash off, and then you have to do reapplications. And then that's the behavioral and taste element. The actual adversion that I was talking about with the geese and the other birds is methyl and threnolate, and it's in reality the grape flavoring in pop is what it is, a concentrated form of that. So pesticides. Avitrol is one that we have seen used here in the past, and it is a restricted use pesticide, and it's to be used as a frightening agent. We get a lot of calls about a lot of dead birds showing up from time to time, and we send those off to labs to detect it in toxicant analysis, and sometimes what comes back is Avitrol. So Avitrol, what it does, you can get it on grains, you know, mixed whole kernel corn, stuff like that. The intended use is you would put a bait station out, the birds come down, one of the birds gets one of those hot pellets, and then what it does is go into distress, squawking, flying, and that bird will eventually die. The intended purpose is the other birds in the flock see that going on and they freak out and they're going to go the other way. We've had cases where this has been mixed too hot, if you will, not according to the label, and people use it as a population management tool, which is not legal to do. Starlicide Complete. Does anybody utilize this in their farms? No? Oh, you have? Okay. So Starlicide Complete, again, is a restricted use pesticide for starlings, and it works great on dairy operations. The problem, as you see here, is the manufacturing company that makes the actual pesticide didn't want to make it anymore, so they're trying to find another company to do just that. And to my knowledge, it's not available on the shelf yet. So if you have a place that you have gotten in the past, they still may have some on the shelf, but don't count on it. And I don't know when it's going to be available. But it is a good product. And the key to any pesticide application is the pre-baiting process. You really want to get these birds acclimated to a certain area, a certain time, and just keep a regimen going. What that also allows you to do is to look for any non-targets. So if you're having other bird species coming in that are protected, you don't want to do that application for your starlings because you're going to kill these protected bird species. So you want to avoid that. And the key is pre-baiting. Don't just buy this stuff, throw it down on the ground and walk away, because it's not going to really give you the good results that you're looking for. Plus, this stuff breaks down pretty readily too. So 24 or 36 hours in the sun, that UV light breaks that active ingredient down, that it's not very toxic anymore. So it's almost inert at that point. The last one, ova control. It is actually, if you will, a suppressant for primarily pigeons, a breeding suppressant. So what it does is you have to feed these pigeons every single day during the breeding season. And if you know anything about pigeons, when do they breed and when can they lay eggs? All year round. So this is a product out there that, it is registered in Ohio, but you also need the Division of Wildlife concurrence if you're going to go that route. I've not known anybody to utilize this stuff. Just another option I'm putting out there because we're just trying to educate you all. So the next element, harassment, is very, with the bigger birds that we're talking about, your geese, your turkeys, vultures, crows, they respond pretty darn well to harassment purposes. And again, yes, they are protected bird species, but you're allowed to harass these birds without any permits needed. Now, don't take the shotgun and try and pepper a couple just to get their attention, because that ill intent may be foreseen as trying to kill that animal. If you are going to use a shotgun, my advice is to point it into the ground the other way of the bird, so what they're hearing is that report of the shotgun. That way the neighbors don't see that and say, okay, he's doing the right thing versus the wrong thing, because it has happened. I've seen it. But anyway, there's different types of harassments. There's auditory harassment, propane exploders, pyrotechnics that I'll talk about here in a little bit, and then also visual types of techniques to utilize. And timing is critical. If the birds aren't there, you don't want to have your propane exploder going off every 10 minutes. You want to do it when the birds are there and just really keep them on their toes, not knowing where that sound or where that device is going to be put the next day, because there is no serval bullet. Here's a couple of the visual harassment tools. Now, you guys tell me, is this plastic coyote scary decoy working for that gosling? Nope. Not a darn thing. That bird can't fly away anyway. But that coyote scare decoy might have worked in the late fall, early winter around the pond and really before those mating pairs set up shop. But at this point, it's not working. It's, my guess probably was sitting there for the last 6-7 months. Some of the other things, the Mylar tape, if you have small like sweet corn crops, you can hang this above the sweet corn itself, and that flashy sound. And then also, if you twist that tape enough, it's not sticky. It's just a reflective tape. It'll make this real loud, dull humming noise, like woo, 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 when that wind comes. And it really does work. Again, short durations. Any lights? The scary eye balloon, a lot of people have them in their barns. My opinion, buy a pizza instead of the scary eye balloon because they don't really work that well. The bottom middle one is an effigy that looks like a dead bird hanging there. That's exactly what it is. Vultures in particular, if you have vulture problems on your farm, black vultures specifically have been known to kill calves and lambs right when they're being born. We got a lot of that in southwestern Ohio going on right now. They are a protected species, but we can get these farmers permits to lethally remove a few of these birds, and then we hang that dead bird up as what we call an effigy. They get the hint. They're very social. They know, hey, George just got shot. We're going to another county. And its lasting effect is almost permanent. But we give the farmers, a couple birds a year to utilize this, and the ones that do it and do it correctly have great results. And then the scarecrows. Again, referring to vultures, these are the things you see at the car lots, that are flailing and stuff like that. We put them on timers and a small blower motor, and when those vultures are coming in to roost, these things turn on and they're flailing back and forth. So again, timing is critical. Green lasers, just like you see here in my hand, these hand lasers work real well for roosting birds in low light situations. So if you have let's say a flock of pigeons in your barn at night, take this green laser and just wind it across them, they're going to fly out. It works really well. Or if you get raptors caught in your barn sometimes, or hangers, lasers, you can almost direct them out the hangar doors or big barn doors because you can direct them. Same thing with geese. If they're on your pond, low light situations, wave that laser across them. It's not going to burn them or hurt their eyes, just the small low power ones. They feel that and see that as a threat to them, a predatory threat, and they react really well. Now, if you had a flock of small birds like sparrows, they're going to do this and go right back down. They're not going to react that well to them. So in general, the larger the bird, the more receptive they are to these harassment techniques. Here's some of the acoustic harassment techniques. The one thing I wanted to point out with this one is species-specific distress calls. Don't buy ultrasonic distress recorders. Birds can't hear that sound wave either. It's been scientifically proven. So if we can't hear it, the birds can't hear it. And I know a lot of people have bought those in the past and have really poor results. But with any of these, you want to move them around, put them on different timer settings, and go from there. The Pyrotechnics, a lot of people, have anybody heard of shell crackers? The 12 gauge, you can put basically, they're M80s in a 12 gauge shell. These are considered what they call 15 millimeter pyrotechnics, and they work real well. Again, if you have a chronic problem with geese or turkeys or crows or whatnot, they're just little starter pistols that shoot these projectiles out. They are allowed to be used in Ohio versus the regular fireworks that you buy at, Phantom fireworks you cannot use. But you can utilize these pyrotechnics when you're dealing with wildlife. And there is a fire hazard associated with them. So biological controls. Dogs, again, just kind of keying in on geese and stuff like that. There are companies out there that have specifically trained dogs, a lot of times border collies, to harass these geese. They're a herding dog. And they'll go out, flush the birds off, and then come back. So you don't want to have, if you're looking at dogs and you have a big problem with them, the geese, you don't want to have a dog come run these geese off in late June, early July, because guess what? They can't fly. They're molting. They're flightless. But those same birds might respond very well this time of year or in the fall once they are again able to take flight. I have this mute swan picture up too because a lot of people are like, oh, we'll just get a swan, put it in the pond, that'll take care of the geese. These swans, again, they're non-native, they're invasive, and they are very aggressive. There's been actually human deaths known associated with these swans because they become so aggressive. So they're non-native, so we don't want them in Ohio anyway. And they're very aggressive, so if you have children and dogs and animals and pets, they will and can attack them. Exclusion, not really pertinent to a farm field, but vineyards, we've seen some good netting in vineyards to prevent some small bird, crop damage to that. And then habitat management, if you have watering holes, certain trees that are attracting birds, and specifically vultures. If you have a flock of vultures in your tree in the middle of your pasture, and you don't have any use for that tree, cut it down. You're making your site less attractive to these types of birds. Population management. So again, if you're looking to do any type of goose control from March through August, you want to contact the Division of Wildlife through their website. One thing I wanted to mention with that is all these birds are protected, but there is what they call a nest destruction memorandum. And what that says is if there is a nest there without eggs or chicks in it, even if it's trying to be constructed, if it's not your eagles and other threatened and endangered species, you can destroy that nest. So a lot of times we'll get red-tailed hawk nest building going on inside of some abandoned barns or even vultures. You can legally go in there and destroy that nest to prevent that bird from laying an egg. Once it does lay an egg, guess what? You're going to need a permit to do any type of removal of that nest until those young of the year fledge and fly away. So the blackbirds I want to talk about real quick. They are protected, your grackles, your redwings, your brown-headed cowbirds. But what they said in the federal CFR 21.43 is we recognize these as a federally protected bird species. However, this depredation order allows you to do lethal control in any of these circumstances when they're causing any type of depredation to ornamental or shade trees, agricultural crops, livestock, or concentrated in numbers that cause a nuisance, that you can do some removal efforts for them without a permit. However, there is recording, you have to record that take throughout the year. You just can't shoot 500 and say, yep, put them in the back. You have to record that and report it to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm trying to wrap up here, but I'm done with my presentation. And if anybody knows crows, do you know what a flock of crows is called? A murder. So I have, through this website here, or I'm sorry, the presentation at the very end, a couple links for everybody to go to of the things I've talked about. They have a wildlife damage, crop damage manual that the Department of Natural Resources has out there. And then also a lot of the extension links for you to go to as well.